Welcome to another session of LinkedIn Live. I'm your host, Robbie Kelman-Baxter. Thank you for tuning in. This series features some of the best thought leaders thinking about subscription business models, going beyond what you read in the headlines, what you read in the news, to talk about what's really going on in today's environment. This is live, so please feel free to share your questions and comments as they arrive. Today I am having a very special guest. We're talking about the FTC's lawsuit against Amazon, why they're naming names, and what it means for all of us who work with subscription models. My guest is Pavana Kumar. She is a partner at Davis and Gilbert, where she helps major advertisers, retailers, disruptive e-commerce providers, and startups assess risk and comply with the changing landscape of advertising and media law. As subscription programs have become more popular, Pavana's knowledge of the highly regulated automatic renewal and negative option laws in all 50 states, together with her deep understanding of the regulatory focus on dark patterns, really sets her apart, which is why I invited her to join us today. I'm sure you're ready to dig in, and I have a ton of questions. So with that, let's get started. Welcome, Pavana.
Hi, Robbie. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So why don't you catch us up? What has been happening with the FTC, particularly relating to subscriptions?
So taking a step back, just for those tuning in as backdrop, the FTC regulates, deceptive and unfair advertising tactics generally. Over the past few years, they've been increasingly focused on automatic renewal and subscription programs, and certainly state regulators in all 50 states are also very focused on those programs. I think one reason that the FTC is really honing in on these is that they're becoming prevalent in every form of media. The FTC currently has a sort of patchwork of laws that it uses to enforce subscription compliance, but they're not fitting very well together right now. So the FTC, I think, is trying to take a more streamlined approach. They are revising the federal negative option rule, which is the federal law governing subscription programs. They have ROSCA, which is the Online Restore Shoppers Confidence Act, which also regulates subscriptions. And they're really trying to come up with a way to have a more streamlined framework to regulate these programs. I think the rationale is that consumers really can get deceived easily with subscription programs. They are so prevalent now, especially after the pandemic, that it's very easy for what was once a consumer retention tactic or industry standard attempts to save consumers, get them to sign up for these programs. What was previously industry standard may now be considered by the FTC to be a deceptive practice, because they really want consumers to understand what exactly they're signing up for, especially if it concerns a digital product, good, or service, where they may not realize that it's automatically renewing. And so the FTC really wants to make clear that these types of programs are a priority and that there are specific requirements for the disclosures consumers need to see when they sign up for those programs, ways in which you have to make it easy for them to cancel, when and how can you save a consumer, and what does it all mean, and how do you get consent to those programs. So I think there's really a federal and a state push to regulate these programs more specifically and more granularly. And I think Amazon's just the FTC's first big, major splashy target to show that it's not afraid to take action against what it considers to be bad actors in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Thanks for that kind of high level view. It is really. I mean, you brought up so many kind of important points. Why is this happening now? You mentioned the FTC is trying to streamline all of the different laws and regulations. Why now? Is it because, as you said, of so many subscriptions, or is it because of so much bad acting or so much complaint, so many complaints from consumers? What do you think is driving it? Is it a political play? I mean, what is driving it at this moment?
I think it's both, and I think the FTC has subscriptions as a subset of what it's calling dark patterns generally. So I think there are a few things. First of all, yes, states and the FTC receive tons and tons of complaints from consumers, specifically around subscription programs. What the FTC is doing is it's rolling in subscriptions to a broader enforcement push. The current FTC under Lena Khan is very aggressive. They're really revisiting ways in which they can get civil penalties from bad actors, e-commerce companies that aren't complying under every avenue possible. There was a recent Supreme Court decision that essentially restricted the FTC's ability to get monetary penalties from companies violating the FTC Act. So what they're doing is they keep putting out these notices of proposed rulemaking. So they're proposing updates to the federal negative option rule. They are proposing dark patterns policies. They just last week issued proposed rulemaking on junk fees. So that's, like hiding fees to the last step in the process. It's all related. And I think this is sort of the FTC's big push to say, we're going to propose all these updates to the laws. We're going to give companies a couple of months to get buttoned up, because what we're seeing are so many consumer complaints and so many bad actors. Now that we're proposing all of these rules, people can review them. There's really no excuse not to get buttoned up pursuant to that specific guidance and the specific tactics that they took aim at in the Amazon case. And then I think they're going to start saying, look, we're not just going to go after the big bad actors anymore. You could be a smaller subscription-based company. You could be a startup. We really want to bring all companies in this space into compliance, because it's just, in the evolving digital marketplace, there are too many ways for consumers to get confused. Digital interfaces are becoming manipulated to push consumers down a certain path that they wouldn't necessarily have chosen if they knew what they were signing up for. I think the FTC is just seeing an explosion of these kind of deceptive tactics because there's new technology now. It's easier for companies to use shading technology, tweak the UX to kind of send consumers down a road they don't necessarily know what they're on. And so I think it's all part of this broader push of regulation of subscriptions and dark patterns. The FTC wants to show that they're not afraid to seek money from these companies if they're not in compliance.
Yeah. So the language, I mean, you use some great phrases: dark patterns, bad actors. I know that they talked about tricking and trapping. That Amazon was tricking and trapping. Do you think that the current FTC leadership is just particularly good at marketing and communications? What is the role of kind of trying to make the language so plain and so clear with their intent?
Yeah, I mean, so the FTC has defined dark patterns in a few ways, but they keep coming back to this trick and trap language, right? And so the most frequent definition that they use is a dark pattern is a manipulative design element that tricks users into making decisions they wouldn't otherwise have made. And I just think the subscription industry is so ripe for that, especially if consumers are purchasing a subscription as an add-on to something else. There's a subscription element that's separate from the rest of the transaction. It's just so ripe for consumer deception. And that's even if they understand they're signing up for an order renewal program, do they understand whether it's monthly or quarterly or annual? Is it an annual subscription, but it's billed monthly? Are there any hidden fees that should get disclosed earlier in the process? I think they're really getting very granular, but I think that Amazon is their big case study because, and especially in naming the senior executives in the amended complaint just a couple of weeks ago, which spurred this conversation, with Amazon, there was a level of egregious behavior that I think it was just such a slam dunk for the FTC to say, not only were these deceptive practices being employed, the senior executives knew about it and actively didn't want to clarify things because of the impact it would have on consumer retention. But I think going forward, they're going to say, look, there's no excuse for companies not to know what they're doing, right? Companies will say, well, we don't want to change the color of that button because then more consumers are going to cancel. I think the FTC's view is, if that's your intent, then that could be acting in bad faith because you really know what you're trying to do, right? You know that you're trying to direct consumers down a certain path. And so there's that balancing act between how do you stop consumer attrition, but not fall on the wrong side of tricking or trapping a consumer into doing something they don't want to do.
Right. And so I think one of the things that's been really interesting about the Amazon suit, and I hope you'll go into a little more detail on what they're specifically angry about, what they're specifically pointing out when you said, this egregious behavior. But one of the things that really struck me is I believe they were using the language of Project Iliad, so that it would be kind of an odyssey. The cancellation was an odyssey. Like you had to go, from this screen to this screen to this screen in order to find your way out. Now, be careful what you write down, because if you're being playful internally and talking about how we're trying to make it harder, or I had one company that I spoke to briefly where they said, we found by adding 2 more screens in the cancel process, that we've been able to keep our customers for an average of 2 months longer. 2 screens, 2 months. It's a great deal for us. If that you're designing your customer experience with the intent of keeping them when they don't want to be there, keeping them when they're not getting value, when they are not intending to continue using your products and services, that's really, I think, what the FTC is trying to stop. So something that I hear, and I don't know if you hear this, Pavana, from your clients, is a lot of companies are worried. They're like, well, we're really small. We don't even have the technology to adhere to whatever regulations are being put into place. And I think that's not really the issue. It's much more around the intention of how you design it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at the Iliad flow, it's obviously an extreme example. It was, in the words of the FTC, a 4-page, 6-click, 15-option cancellation process, as compared to the 102-click sign-up system that, in of itself was lacking certain disclosures. So yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's not, let's go after a small company that's technically, not in compliance because they, have a really simple interface or something like that. It's more, it needs to be as easy for consumers to cancel as it was to sign up. You shouldn't be engaging in what it's specifically cited as obstructionary tactics, misdirection, the use of what they call confirm shaming, which is like, no, I don't like getting great deals on stuff, things like that.
I never heard that. Confirm shaming. That's great.
Yeah, confirm shaming. Use of double negatives, forced actions, things like that, and specifically upsell tactics, right? So oftentimes you'll be on an app that automatically renews, and you go to cancel, and they say, wait, before you go, you could save $15, or we'll give you 15% off your next month if you don't cancel. The FCC is really focused on that, and I think they're going to get a bit of industry backlash, because in what they're proposing as the updates to the federal rule, it's not law yet, but I bet it will be soon, is basically that in order for a company to upsell a consumer before they cancel, you have to get their consent to see the offer. So it can't even be contemporaneous. You have to say something like, hey, I see that you want to cancel. Before you cancel, would you consider seeing an additional offer? If they say no, you have to treat the cancellation basically effective immediately. And the same would go for if they called in or they were on a chatbot and they're getting fed up with the process and they disconnect. The FTC is proposing that that should also be presumed a cancellation, which I certainly don't think is industry standard. And then stating the obvious, it should be as easy to cancel as it was to sign up. That doesn't mean if it took 16 steps to sign up that you can force people to go through 16 steps to cancel. They really want it to be immediate, one step, but at a minimum, as easy as it was to sign up and in the same medium. So like if you signed up over the phone, you should be able to cancel over the phone, and the same thing for online. And that tracks what the states are proposing as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you said, that they're looking at not allowing upsell. What about, and maybe this is just a language thing, but I'm guessing that people listening are probably having the same question I am, which is, what about downsell? So a lot of times the save offer. So I say I want to cancel, and the company says to me, wait, we don't want to lose you. What about a smaller offer? Instead of getting the paper 7 days a week, what about just Sunday? Instead of subscribing 3 out at a time, what if you had 1 out at a time? Is that also something that they're looking at shutting down? So it's just having any kind of save offer is no longer going to be possible unless I say, yes, please show me the save offer. Otherwise, I don't have to see it.
Yeah, it specifically saves. So they cite upsell tactics as a type of save, but they actually define this category as attempts to save the consumer. So you'd have to get consent for any save attempt. And then they will also be looking at, even if the person does say, yes, I'd like to see additional offers, you have to be very careful about how you present them. So like in the Amazon case, the FTC said that their upsells in of themselves were potentially deceptive because the enrollment button to accept the upsell was in a much more prominent color. It was bigger in size, and then the decline link was very inconspicuous. So, even if you are presenting an upsell, you need to be careful that you're not intentionally guiding people. And I get this all the time from my clients, right? It's like, why is the yes, I want to cancel button grayed out and the other one's a different color? And they're like, well, obviously it's because we want people to be less drawn to the cancellation option. But I think the FTC is really going to start cracking down on that. And again, it's not necessarily industry practice. There's a reason that e-commerce companies do this, right? There's a reason that you're trying to guide people to not cancel or to accept the upsell offer. But I just think there's really a lot of aggressive attitudes from the regulators about trying to crack down on that.
Yeah, it is. It does feel like the pull is, is swinging to the opposite side right now. As consumers have been complaining for a long time, but the rules may be, really stringent for those of us building subscription businesses. Maybe even going beyond just, kind of the good karma, treat others as you'd like to be treated, but actually now holding them to a higher standard. I'm wondering, if you're just joining us, this is Robbie Baxter talking subscription law with Pavana Kumar, talking about the recent FTC lawsuit against Amazon, what that means for all subscription practitioners, and also what it means for consumers. We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll do our best to get you on live. And if you want to share your worst actors, go right ahead. If there's a newspaper you haven't been able to cancel, or a streaming service, or anything else, we'd love to hear about it. So continuing on, you brought up several really interesting and important things. We just were talking about removing the ability to save, to put forward a save offer. And also, the design element of this, which is, you can't have a giant button that says continue and a tiny button that says decline, or a giant button that says upgrade me now. I want to benefit, and then a tiny button that says no, I don't care to be successful in my life or have any fun, right?
Exactly. No thanks. I like paying full price.
Right. What did you call that? Something shaming?
Confirm shaming.
Confirm shaming. So really moving away from confirm shaming. So what does that mean for those of us who are running subscription businesses and are watching what's going on with Amazon and all of the signals and announcements that have been made by the FTC in recent months? What should they be doing right now? What does this mean for us?
I think it's a really important time to be doing a full audit of your e-commerce flows, how consumers sign up for the program, what acknowledgements you're sending them, making sure you really know what the other requirements are, such as reminder notices for free trials, reminder notices for quarterly, 6-month, or annual programs in the specific timing. There are federal proposals around specific timing, but this is also regulated on a state-by-state basis, with states like California, DC, Vermont, and New York being quite stringent. So, this is where I help my clients, because it's a lot of different laws to keep track of. And sometimes a company will say, I want to take the lowest common denominator approach to make sure we're compliant with everything. Sometimes companies want to bifurcate the approach. If there's like a lot of consumers in California, but not a lot of consumers in New York, maybe they're okay sending the New York consumers down a slightly less conservative path. But it's really important to be looking at these flows. And specifically extrapolating from Amazon, again, these were egregious practices, but some of them are also practices that have been, industry standards. So, for example, they cite using design elements that manipulate the user interface in ways that privilege certain specific information, but not other information. So that could be hiding disclosures relevant to a subscription program. They talk about avoiding obstructionary techniques. That's basically intentionally complicating any kind of process through unnecessary steps, which basically leads consumers to give up. So one example of that is the Iliad flow or cancellation. Look for design elements that are intended to focus the consumer's attention on one thing to distract them from another. So again, making it easier to abandon an attempted cancellation than to complete it, or drawing them to options other than canceling, like, remind me later, keep my benefits. Something else they're really focused on is, hiding or disguising relevant information or delaying its disclosure. And actually just a week and a half ago, the FTC's proposed yet another rule around junk fees, hidden prices, tactics like drip pricing, which is putting, additional fees on the very last page for consumers checkout. I think that's very relevant to subscription programs too, because you might be advertising, just $3.99 a month, but then you're like, but plus sales tax and plus resort fee for a hotel membership and plus a bunch of other fees. And so the price you're advertising really isn't the right price. I think they're going to be very focused on that. And then certainly looking at your cancellation and any consumer save tactics. So, typically when I work with a retailer, will actually go through, whether it's on Figma or whatever, go through each stage of the process in terms of how it looks to a consumer, do an analysis of that, kind of line edit, what do we feel like should be changed, what do we feel is a manageable risk on balance, showing that you're trying to do all the right things, but you're still, running a business and you need to still make a profit. I think that's the practical aspect of this, right? Is not to say, you have to knock people over the head with trying to get them out of your program. Obviously, that's just business. But I think taking a very nuanced look at it to say, where can we toe the line? So we're, acting in good faith, but still, maintaining profitability. And then operationally, what are your processes for sending out reminder emails, cancellation notices, things like that. Again, that varies on state by state. There's sort of the visual aspect of it and the making sure you're buttoned up operationally as well.
Yeah, we have a question from Matthew Kurbis. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Would pausing a subscription be a way for companies to comply with new regulations, assuming that the pausing the subscription means at no cost to subscribers? I'm guessing that Matthew means this in the context of it's not really a save offer, but it is something that gets in the way between I'd like to cancel and I actually cancel. Hey, I'd like to cancel. How about pause? No, I'd like to cancel. Is that allowed?
That's a really, really great question. The FTC doesn't address that specifically. If I were getting that question from a client, I would say, let's look at how you're presenting that. If the pause option is presented contemporaneously with the cancellation option, it's equally clear for them to be able to cancel, and it's one screen, I'd probably say the FTC is not going to go after that. Because, it is still a way to save, but assuming that they can suspend and then they're not going to be billed again until they reactivate it, I'd say where you might get tripped up on that is if you say pause a subscription, but then you have some fine print saying your subscription will be paused for 3 months and thereafter will start automatically renewing again. I think that would be what they'd consider to be a deceptive tactic.
Okay, no, that's great. That makes sense. And that is a really good technique. And especially, we've seen that a lot with physical subscriptions, e-commerce subscriptions. I don't see it as much, and maybe you do, with content subscriptions, streaming subscriptions, software subscriptions, services subscriptions. But it is a good way when somebody knows, for the next 3 months, I'm not going to be able to watch, I've got a big project at work. I'm not going to be able to be watching, so much video content. To be allowed to pause it does seem like a good intermediary response.
Yeah, I've seen it for things like online fitness subscriptions too, right? If you're like, I'm not going to be working out and using these benefits for the next so many months, It might be better to just pause it, but not be charged for those months as well. And the FTC is actually very focused on, they're focused on everything, and the proposed revisions to the federal laws are intended to kind of encompass all subscription programs and all media. But they are specifically focused, especially when it comes to things like reminders, on digital services. Their rationale is like if you're receiving like a book of the month or you're getting something in the mail every month, like, the old archaic Netflix DVDs, you're going to remember that you're subscribed to it. Whereas if it's a digital only subscription, you're more likely to forget. That seems pretty basic, but that's why they're more focused on kind of services right now.
Awesome. I want to just take a minute to welcome Mirza Odobasic. I hope I said that right. Tuning in from Bosnia, somebody who found us through the business development course that I teach on LinkedIn Learning. Thank you for joining us, Mirza. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them. And those of you who are just arriving, please let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you have legal questions in light of all the changes going on, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them in the next 5 or 10 minutes that we have before we're going to wrap it up. Hi, Precious from Lagos. Nice to see you. Welcome. Let us know if you have any questions relating to subscription law. And thinking about these international guests that are joining us today, and I don't know if this is a fair question for you, Pavan, or something that you cover, but it seems to me that some other parts of the world are maybe a little bit ahead of us in terms of protecting privacy and protecting subscribers. What are you seeing in terms of maybe where the FTC might be getting ideas and what might be coming down the pike based on what you're seeing other global regions already doing?
In a lot of ways, and I work on a lot of global subscription programs too. We coordinate with local counsel if it's a really complicated issue, but something we do see is that the FTC is actually setting the tone for subscription programs specifically. I've seen these types of issues getting picked up in Canada and in the UK. Certainly the ASA in the UK is kind of trying to track what the FTC is doing, and there's been a proposed bill in the UK that would essentially track everything we've been talking about today. Yes, there are obviously GDPR and other privacy issues in the EU. So for example, countries like Germany are also very focused on the collection of consumer data, probably a little bit outside of the scope of our conversation today. But certainly if there's any kind of global subscription program, I always say let's get it into compliance in the US first. Let's make sure we're buttoned up on the privacy side of things, and then let's identify your top 5 markets and kind of see where we can get a lowest common denominator there. But actually, I think it's a bit of a flip. I think other markets are taking a lead from the US right now on this specific issue.
Interesting. The one exception, and I know this is definitely a little bit beyond the scope of our Amazon talk, but what's going on with, I think it's with Meta, both Facebook and Instagram, on their suggestion to get around the privacy restrictions around targeted ads. They're saying, what if we offered a subscription? So if you don't want us to target you with personalized ads, your option is to pay for an ad-free subscription, and putting that forward as an alternative. Any thoughts on that? I don't know if that's something that you've been following, or if you have an opinion on.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously offering what they're proposing, offering a choice between a free ad-supported plan and a paid subscription might lead to users opting for the former, which I think theoretically Meta thinks is going to help them comply with the EU regulations without affecting its ad business. I'm not sure that's going to be such a successful tactic, because again, if people are taking a guide from the US, you're essentially almost like not forcing people's hand, but you're basically saying like, it's going to be this more unattractive option unless you opt for this thing that's going to help our business. So I think it's a bit of a stab in the dark. It'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold move. It's like, if you don't want to be the they always say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. It's like, if you want this content and you don't want to be the product, you have to pay for the product, I think is sort of the logic. But because I think, they were presenting it as this is, an ad supported thing, they're still charging for ads. So I found that really interesting. I want to change gears and go back to the Amazon case, because something that I noticed is, they're naming names. They're actually naming specifically 3 Amazon senior executives in the lawsuit. And for those of us who are involved in subscription business models or leading subscription-based businesses, that's scary, right? Because it's not just a lawsuit against Amazon; it's a lawsuit against specific individuals. Why is that important, or is it important?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. The FTC has named individual defendants in prior cases, especially, in the endorsement sphere, native advertising, naming the CEO of a PR agency that's part of a complaint. So they've done it before. I think what they're trying to show is that they're willing to do this in challenges to large publicly traded companies, as well as smaller companies, and to make an example. And I think, again, to highlight the bad actors terminology we were using before, all of the discovery that the FTC has done is alleging that these executives were totally aware of the issues surrounding consumers being subscribed without their consent, and then facing these significant hurdles when trying to cancel. And they either chose not to act, or they slowed, or they rejected user experience changes, often being proposed by their own internal tech teams that were designed to reduce the potential for deception. And they basically said, we prefer not to clarify because there's going to be a big impact on revenue. And so I think it is important, because they're showing that if there are those kind of internal shenanigans going on, they are not going to be afraid to name individual defendants. But I also think it's a way of them showing, we can bring these kinds of actions without the executives necessarily being such bad actors, but they can also bring these cases and name the individual defendants if there's that going on. So I think it's also important to look at it on the flip side. The FTC's brought a lot of subscription-based cases in the past, like against Match, F9 Cosmetics. That one just settled. They're prohibited from engaging in subscription programs ever again. They have a lifetime ban on subscription marketing now, which is another consequence. You might not just get fined, you might get told you can never engage in this business model again, which for some companies might be the end of your business. Snack box companies like Earthbox have been targeted. It's all over the map, and individual defendants weren't named in those cases, but I think the FTC is showing that they're just willing to do that going forward. People can be personally liable for this behavior.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff. It's pretty scary, but it's also, from the consumer perspective, I think it's pretty great. Because the whole point, I mean, just to get on my soapbox for 1 second, the whole point of subscriptions, the reason that consumers that it works so well is that consumers are able to relax into a relationship with the organization and say, this organization is going to solve an ongoing problem for me. I don't need to worry about it anymore. I can just trust that I'm paying a fair price every month or every week or every year. And in exchange, I'm getting value that I want. Any organization that is trying to take advantage of that trust by, sneaking in junk fees or making it difficult to cancel when it's time to cancel, or upgrading them without realizing that they're upgrading, or ending their pause period without really letting them know that after 3 months they're going to be taken off pause. All of that is, I think, taking advantage of trust and getting away from law just for a second. This is really about ethics. It's about, treating the customer the way that they think they're going to be treated, and making it easy for them to sign up and easy for them to leave when they want to leave. So I would really encourage you to, take a step away from all the legal issues and just start with that, because these very real regulation changes, lawsuits are happening. So don't even go there, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's both, right? It's law and it's ethics. I mean, the law prohibits unfair or deceptive practices, which are, inherently unethical practices. And I always say, when we're starting to go through these processes and, companies might be overwhelmed by how to comply, I always start by saying, are there any places where you're trying to hide the ball? You might not be trying to be a bad actor, but you might be trying to delay certain information. You might be trying to guide consumers down a certain path. Just ask yourself, really, am I doing this in the spirit of transparency, or am I really trying to sneak something in here? And kind of start from there, right? It's low-hanging fruit to kind of clean that up, and then you can get into all these specifics about reminder notices and exactly what disclosure has to say and all of that stuff. And understanding we're short in time, if anyone has specific questions, we'll drop my email in the chat and a couple of our recent alerts about the Amazon case as well. So it's sort of clean up your act first, then you can get into the specifics. And sometimes that's just half an hour conversation with an attorney can kind of get that backdrop. It's not, necessarily always a huge exercise, but it's good to do that early before you're trying to, retroactively change all of your back end and your UX and saying, well, we can't do that because it's going to be too much, too much money or too much hassle. So just try to deal with it on the front end, especially because I think the FTC is going to be very active in the coming months, in subscriptions, but also everything else, endorsements, consumer reviews, junk fees, all kinds of e-commerce tactics are super on their radar. Use of AI, they're just going to start bringing actions against other companies, and Amazon's kind of their test case. So it's a good time to get buttoned up, even if you think you're not the kind of company that would be on their radar necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to wrap it up, although I could talk to Pavana for hours. There's so much to learn. But I'm gonna pop this up from user Elizabeth. It seems the FTC is trying to impose more transparency with subscription offers, which is good for consumers. In these situations, I think about my 94-year-old uncle. Is it simple for him to cancel or change his subscription offer? Or later on for someone administering his estate? This is right on. I'm so glad to close with this. This is really the way we all should be thinking about it. Is it easy enough for Elizabeth's 94-year-old uncle to cancel? And with that, I want to thank Pavana for spending time with us. Pavana there's tons of content on her website. I'm going to ask my assistant Nat to put it in the chat. So if you keep your eyes peeled, you will see the links to what do you have? You have a white paper.
Yep, I have a couple of recent alerts that I've published. I've also published with SUBTA, the Subscription Trade Association. I have a blog post on the Amazon case. And then, of course, my contact will get dropped down if anyone wants to follow up with me directly. And also, if anyone wants to be added to our mailing list, you should feel free to reach out. I'm very responsive and always happy to hear from people. So
yeah, please DM Pavana or me if you want to get on their mailing list or on mine. And with that, we'll say thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. Real pleasure, and we'll see you soon on the net.